and you press the start button. You just go to start without us even knowing. And then you tell us. That's how you've done it at least the last 2 times, I feel like.
Just
I think
ambush
we
you
can milk
guys.
that for 8 to 10 episodes of Minsky's.
And then it's going to be boring.
And then we have to find a new hook, but that's your job, not ours.
As showrunner, I will just force you to do things that you don't want to do. That are
You have to
corny and
manipulate
awful.
us into doing things that we're not.
Exactly. It's not even forcing. That's
Be behind
too
the
much work.
scenes.
Exactly.
So.
Make us think we wanted it all along.
It's Inception. It's Inception for podcasting.
Well, I have something off topic. Do you either of you want to buy a pair of wireless earbuds
Maybe.
that may or may not ship and may or may not come in January to March next year?
How much
No,
and what?
I have the world's crappiest wireless earbuds, and they're more than enough for me if I ever need wireless earbuds.
What are they?
I bought Jabra 75T Elite.
Oh, yeah, that one's...
Whatever. They're like...
The mint-colored ones?
Yeah, the cheapest they've ever been is before this has been like $170, and I got them for $112. But they don't have a ship date, so
Yikes.
if you want to put a deposit down on them, yeah, it's allowed.
Oh, is it still up?
It's
Or just
still
on
low.
yours?
No, because I got them on the mint doesn't
The
exist
deal.
on Amazon anymore.
Hmm.
I bought them when they were out of stock, but still at the price. So then, as soon as they get stocked, they'll send them to me. But they won't charge my credit card until they ship. But I don't know. I probably won't keep them. So probably either cancel the order or sell them.
Oh, tempting. Anyways, we should probably get rocking and rolling into the topic. We are doing... What's that?
We're started then.
Yes. We've been going for 2 minutes. I did actually pull a fast one on you guys.
That was implied, I guess.
Exactly. It was all a ploy. So, we're covering the COVID-19 vaccine updates. We're just going to do a quick update. And I think what we'll do is start off...
When the world is going to end and the microchips are going to be implanted.
Exactly.
My
That's
shirts
the
are so
update.
passe. I think you mean when they rewrite our DNA to make us all mindless slaves.
That's implied.
That's what the chips do. They sit in your bloodstream, cycling
That's why you
through
have
all of your
headache
cells.
and fatigue and fevers, because your DNA is being rewritten. You're being mind controlled. Like, it's all happening at once. Total body
System overload.
makeover. And you're hooking up to the cloud.
You're on the Internet of Things now.
See
5G
this
antenna in your brain.
exactly. That's what the vaccine was, and that's what the 5G towers were for. It's
Is it a
all
coincidence that
coming together.
Rolling out Amazon neighborhood or whatever right now. Think about it.
And then with the drones, so they can watch for people to make sure that nobody is undoing any of their DNA rewriting,
It's not reversible.
just in case. Gotta have stopgap after stopgap. All right, so you want to start with thoughts before? Hubbard, do you want to kick it off?
With thoughts before?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's a little tricky because I've kept up somewhat with the COVID stuff, including the vaccine stuff. But before going into it deeper, I knew that it was obviously the two leading candidates that were talked about were the Pfizer and Moderna, which were both mRNA, they are both effective. And that the measures that they had really got in terms of what effective means was just COVID cases prevented. There hadn't really been anything relating to hospitalizations, ICU, death. Those outcomes weren't measured yet, so that could be add or detract from the effectiveness as measured by just COVID cases prevented. As in the vaccine might be shown to prevent cases, but if you do get sick with the vaccine, you're more likely to get a severe case. Well, that reduces its effectiveness, essentially, right? Or the reverse, right? You're less likely if you get it to get a severe case, and you're less likely to get it in general. Well, that's doubly effective. So we didn't really know that. and yeah, as far as I knew, we didn't know that yet. Also, lots of people will probably, like, especially it seems like in the U.S., or we're not going to take it right away. Kind of like a lot of people playing wait and see how other people do after they take it. So, I mean, that'll be a huge problem as they roll it out. It's not just, in the beginning, it probably still will be supply constrained, but it might be, so to speak, demand constrained as we go forward, and people not wanting to take doses that are readily available. And as far as I knew, Canada was going to get vaccines later than most of the developed world because we don't have any capacity to manufacture them ourselves. So based on that, we kind of just get stuck in the back of the line behind anyone that had manufacturing capacity. And I also had seen, prior to going into the research, that it's probably better to give doses to those most at risk of spreading, not necessarily those most vulnerable to the virus, which might be a little counterintuitive for some people, thinking that maybe you should 100% vaccinate all the most vulnerable first. Seems like you're probably going to get bigger bang for your buck going for the highest spreaders first. Yeah, so that was kind of what I thought going into it.
Yeah, the only thing I really have to add to, you knew a bit more going into it than I did, but the questions about COVID immunity, I didn't know much about, so I kind of had it in the back of my mind that a vaccine wouldn't be a lifetime vaccine, but I wasn't sure about whether or not that was actually going to play out. And I mean, yeah, we won't know whether or not it plays out like that, but I was entirely unsure as to which way the evidence would point.
All right, and then for myself, the thoughts before, pretty similar to you guys, but there's a couple other things. I thought that despite progress on the vaccine front, the world still has a very long road to go. It's likely that we're going to be dealing with this crap for at least another 2 years, like into 2022, maybe deep into 2022, and it wouldn't be till maybe 2023 that it actually is or late 2022 that things are back to what we would consider the new normal, like something approximating normal. And the other thing I also thought is there might be a big enough anti-vax, like a general anti-vax movement, that this might keep this endemic, I guess would be the term, in the population pretty much permanently. So those are the only two things I would have to add. Do you guys want to jump right into your research?
Might as well, I think.
Yeah.
I think
the only thing we could talk about kind of prior to that maybe is just, was there anything that you saw in the media or like how it was covered quickly that
there's
like what?
Yeah, one thing that I kind of picked up, at least in my general vicinity, is people kind of think, oh, now that the vaccine's ready, we're, give it 6 months and we're going to be good to go again. Like, it's only 6 more months away and then things will be fine. So that's kind of something I've seen at least a little bit, where they think everything's going to be pretty much normal by maybe like next summer, maybe a little bit later or a little bit earlier, but it's like the magic bullet is here.
I would say, from what I've seen and from what I've now researched, that surprisingly, the media and what I see generally is actually a little bit pessimistic. Like, there's evidence to go on that would allow you to make bolder claims than I've seen, and I don't see that being done. So I think that's a good thing, but it's interesting.
Yeah, I saw that as well, with like the educated portions of what I was looking at, but not so much in the people who are not paying attention to it. It's like, oh, vaccine's here, pretty good to go then, like soon.
Well, to be fair, I mean, people have been acting like vaccines not here, good to go.
Yeah, it's true.
Yes, this
It's
is
just
true in
over.
terms of normal people.
Yeah.
Like, your average Joe under the age of like 50 seems to not give a flying fuck, regardless of vaccine, no vaccine. Like,
I did see
Oh yeah.
tangentially a study on social distancing as measured by smartphones and the progress of the pandemic in America. And it was correlated pretty well with measures to control the pandemic and social distancing. And then recently, in a lot of the states where it's blowing up, it's kind of divorced from each other. People just stop social distancing despite the fact that the pandemic is getting worse.
yeah, I think we could. I mean, that's more of like a broader topic than vaccines, but I think people have to, like, the most, say, what's the word for it? Neurotic, over the top worry words are acting like you should, shelter in place for the next year. And it's like, I think in BC we had Dr. Henry, who was, some people criticize her as being too lax. Some probably too also, maybe in our circles, the criticisms has been like, oh, everything's too lax. And then, other circles obviously has been, oh, it's much too harsh. But I think to the people who say it's too lax is like, you have to like tie it to what people are willing to actually do. Like, you can literally put in the strictest enforcement possible. Like, you can make it, stricter than China. I mean, well, maybe not constitutionally, but you could try that. But people will just say, oh, well, that's like totally unrealistic. To hell with it all. Like, people are not going to, people are probably not going to be as likely to pick and choose. They're probably going to just say, is this kind of like,
take it or leave it.
Yeah, is this plan realistic? Does this make sense? And if one thing in it doesn't make sense to them, there's probably a fairly decent chance they're just going to toss out the whole slew of recommendations. Is like, oh, this is like beyond unrealistic. Like, fuck it all, right? They're not going to say, oh, well, this one thing looks a little over the top, I'm just going to stop doing that, or I'm not going to follow that one particular thing. They're probably going to say, oh man, all this stuff is just too much. Like, fuck it, I'm just going to go, like, life, I'm just going back to normal. Like, this is too much.
I think you definitely see that. Like,
yeah, I think you do see it in a lot of places where they've gone really heavy, and people.
It's just it's huge caseloads, like California, right? They have really high restrictions, and here it's blown up like crazy. I think,
and I think the risk, the lower risk groups, they are just not going to listen to high, overly strict guidelines if they don't think it's sensible cost benefit for them.
Yeah, I would agree there for sure.
But I guess circling back to the vaccines, maybe we should just kind of run through the more mundane, the more boring work of just like what's on the table and what's out there.
I think we could start with like what basic vaccines exist. Like the most old school vaccine that most people would be familiar with is an attenuated vaccine, which means that back in the real old days, they would take a weak version of a virus and infect people with it and hope that they didn't get a bad reaction and survived, and then they'd be immune.
Or dead, a dead virus.
Yeah. And now, in the modern era of the 1900s and onwards, they would take the virus and they would culture it in laboratories, and then they would work on finding ways to kill the virus so that it couldn't cause severe illness and death in people when they injected it as a vaccine, and the body would still recognize the virus and prepare a response to it. And the main problem with that, and why you won't see it as a COVID vaccine in the next year, is that whole system takes about, probably at best, 18 months, like if everything works, and historically much longer than that. Like, this is cutting edge to get it that fast. So the vaccines that have come in to replace that are new in that, to my knowledge, they haven't been used in humans before.
Which might certainly mRNA have not been used. This is going to be the first time they ever roll out an actual.
They haven't been used in humans as vaccines.
Yeah.
So the simplest one that bears the most in common with the original method is a viral vector. So they go into a virus that has little to no effect on a human, for instance, from a chimpanzee, and it won't replicate in humans, and they modify the virus's genetics so that it displays a protein from the virus they want to vaccinate against. So what they've got going on the Oxford vaccine is a monkey virus that looks like a COVID virus to the immune system, and the immune system mounts a response and gets you vaccinated in that fashion, which is pretty traditional outside of the fact that they've modified a virus instead of finding a way to kill a virus. And the more complicated one is mRNA, which hasn't been used as a vaccine before, but has been used pretty prominently in cancer treatments without any significant side effects. And that is to actually inject small molecules of mRNA, which are basically a blueprint that tells your cell how to build the viral proteins in your body. And then your cells will actually create these proteins and train your immune system in that way instead of needing a virus at all.
That's very clever.
The last option that I think honestly would have the most issue with public appeal just because of how it sounds is a DNA vaccine. And that is almost the same as an mRNA vaccine because that's how it ends. But one step earlier is injecting DNA instead of mRNA. And that DNA will then create mRNA that will then create the proteins in your cells to train your immune system. And I think that public acceptance there would be rough just because people get creeped out by the word DNA. It doesn't have anything to do with your genetic code. It's a self-contained unit, but it's still a creepy idea.
It's lipid encased, right? Just like the mRNA?
Yeah, that's to make them more stable.
Yeah.
And it's also used in
more stable than mRNA.
Yeah, it's inherently more stable.
So that's probably why it's considered even.
So
well, they're also both of those are also used in cancer treatment. Like DNA cancer treatment is also a thing.
So I just want to point out for the viewer that the protein that would be synthesized is the spike protein. So when you see the picture of the coronavirus with all the little spikes sticking out, the mRNA or the DNA are going to code for that spike. So that, because that's the thing that attaches to a human cell, in which that injects the viral RNA into the cell. So that's what we mean by protein.
Well, and that's also relevant because it doesn't create a whole coronavirus. It doesn't infect you with an actual live virus. It's just a fragment of the coronavirus.
Yeah, it couldn't make you sick with the coronavirus because it has no part of the coronavirus that actually could make you sick.
Which, in terms of like safety risk, it actually makes mRNA vaccines
safest,
super safe in terms of like because there's no live virus and there's no possibility of a live virus, so there's no possibility of it like screwing up and infecting someone with the disease at all. Like it's just the worst case scenario is it just doesn't do anything in terms of like creating an immune response or an effective immune response essentially.
So those are the three big ones. Now do you want to kind of go into some other general concepts about the vaccine? Anything to add to that?
I guess we could cover immunity before we cover like the specific vaccines. So because that was a big question and still is a big question obviously because we have like 8 months of data like total essentially. So whether or not like what the situation for long-term immunity for COVID-19 looks like, it seems like the indication is there is some optimistic data coming out that there is going to be at least a reasonably long-lived immunity to COVID.
So long-lived meaning?
That's the question, right? Because we have 8 months of data, but so the best that they've been able to do is extrapolate from comparisons to other viruses. So there is an antibody. Antibodies are actually at a higher level, 6 months compared to 1 month in people with COVID after the illness, and that's kind of follows trajectory of other viruses, which is a good indication. And then I guess depending on your level of biology, this is something I didn't know. So there's antibodies aren't the be all end all. There's basically there's two different types of immune response: your innate immune response and your adaptive. So most of what we've been focusing on is and this is how vaccines work, is through your adaptive immune response, and that comes through your lymphocytes, which there's basically two categories of lymphocytes: your big and small. Your big lymphocytes, that's natural killer lymphocytes, and they do what they sound like. They kill things. They kill virus particles in your body. And then the small ones, there's two types of them. There's B cells and T cells. So when people talk about antibodies, they mean they're basically they're little molecules, I guess molecules created by your B cells that attach to viruses or other invaders that kill or mark for killing. I guess not kill, but they inactivate or mark for destruction virus particles, right? So they will latch onto the virus and either inactivate it by preventing it from, say, attaching to your own cells, or they will actually basically act as a marker for other cells to come in and kill the virus. And then there's T cells, and there's three types of T cells. There's killer T cells, which do what you'd suspect. They kill the virus particles as well. And then there's regulatory T cells, which basically regulate your immune response. And then there is what's the
helper
name? Yeah, helper T cells, which basically stimulate your B cells to create antibodies. So that would be the antibodies that everyone talks about is created by your B cells, and yes, they're important because they do inactivate and mark for destruction virus particles, but T cells are also important. Seems like T cells for COVID have a half-life of 3 to 5 months, so basically meaning, if I'm understanding correctly, that the level of T cell halves over 3 to 5 months in COVID. And again, this is on a similar trajectory to a lot of other viruses that have been seen where antibodies will build up, peak, and then kind of plateau at a lower level. So we actually haven't seen the plateau for antibodies yet. Not far enough into the cycle, like the COVID hasn't been around long enough for us to see that plateau. And the half-life is similar also to other viruses, which provides a good indication. It doesn't seem like out of the ordinary. It seems like there will be some long-lived immunity. I don't know if you guys want to add to that? Probably do.
Yeah, so there's a lot to add to that, but that covers all the basics of how the immune system functions. I think all that you really need to know. So
you heard it here first, boys. No need to go to school for biology. Got it.
Well, not if you just want to know a little bit about how a vaccine works. I think the way to start would be with continue with what's been observed in clinical patients with COVID. And the weirdest thing, and it was observed in SARS as well, which there's a lot of analogs to be drawn between the two, is that a certain aspect of the B cell response is not being seen in COVID patients with moderate to severe symptoms, although this study didn't look at COVID patients with little to no symptoms, so they can't generalize it for all patients with COVID. it could be an aspect of how an individual responds to COVID, or it could be intrinsic to the disease itself. And it inhibits a proper development of B cells that are long lasting and develop more effective antibodies through effectively what the body does is has a, they call it a germinal center, where your B cells congregate and undergo enhanced sped up evolution to develop more effective antibodies at combating the virus. And this isn't happening in a lot of cases of COVID, and didn't happen in a lot of cases of SARS. And that is an indicator that there could be issues with long-term immunity, because those B cells that develop in that situation in the germinal centers are long-lived and confer long-term immunity to many viruses and other viruses. So this leads into possibly the biggest benefit of vaccines that I didn't realize before looking into it, which is that a vaccine doesn't elicit whatever it is that causes this issue with germinal cell formation. So a vaccine will cause a more sustained B cell response to infection than a natural infection will. So even if natural infections are not leading to very long-term immunity, that doesn't mean that a vaccine won't lead to long-term immunity, because there is a problem with the immune system that is facing dealing with COVID in the wild.
So that is some good news for the vaccines, that even with, you might actually see a better response from the immune system given a vaccine versus you actually getting the actual coof itself. Potentially.
Well, getting exposed to COVID a second time after you've already had it, which would be, that would be very impressive if vaccines are better than going through the actual illness itself. The other thing that, just for immunity, kind of more bottom line that I've seen based on information from people more knowledgeable than myself, essentially was that there's probably going to be some sort of long-term immunity, and there's probably, for something like COVID, there's probably a chance that about a 1 in 10 chance that someone would be reinfected, essentially. So like about 10% of people will be susceptible to reinfection, but there is a good chance that their reinfection would be less severe than their first time around. It's not, again, all this stuff is speculative at this point, because as far as I know, when I last checked, there's only been 25 actual cases of reinfection examined in the scientific literature. So that's
globally too.
That's nothing. It's not meaningful enough to produce anything for sure. And we're only at 8 months, right? This is just, it's impossible to tell how many people are gonna be immune, and for how long, and what course they can expect for, in the case of a reinfection. You might expect a less severe course, but what that actually means, or what that'll translate statistically, is very difficult to tell. So it seems like the fundamentals of immunity for COVID are good enough that vaccines should be useful, I guess, is the bottom line.
They'll definitely be extremely useful.
There's nothing in the, as far as I can tell, in the immunity literature saying vaccines are going to be just, basically next to useless in dealing with COVID now and going forward. So that's good news. It means that vaccines fundamentally should be a very useful tool, basically throughout, even if say COVID does become endemic and changes, very likely that they'd be able to adapt, much like the flu, along with that, vaccines, right? So that's good news, and especially for something like mRNA vaccines that are being put on the table, that could be actually a very quick response in terms of being able to update the vaccine, just
Yeah.
given the way the mRNA vaccines work. They can actually be, as Price was previously saying, other vaccines take 18 months sometimes to get through the getting a weakened virus form. They wouldn't need to do that. They would just need to come up with a new strand of mRNA that.
Yeah, because all you need to do is decode the virus itself, then take whatever chunk of the DNA or the RNA codes for the spike protein, and then swap that in for your mRNA vaccine. So you could theoretically do it in maybe a week or something to swap out and then rebuild.
In practice, in the course of this disease, it took days for the spike protein to be sequenced. So it's incredibly short.
Exactly.
The
so
thing
you
that
could
takes
have
forever is the testing.
Yeah, exactly. It's
so if it did mutate, I guess is what I'm saying. It's likely that they'd be much more agile in their vaccine response than previous vaccines have been for, say, mutations. So there is good news that mRNA is, and I guess we should probably talk about the particular vaccines.
Well, before we get into, I just have more to talk about with SARS and its influence on immunity before we get into the actual vaccines.
Sure. Why don't we?
So, as you're saying, there's not a lot with SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19 to go off of. So a lot of interest has been drawn back to previous studies on immunity to SARS, which in the least optimistic study that I found, they could not find evidence of B cells or neutralizing antibodies 6 years after exposure to SARS, even though both of those things could be found 3 years after exposure to SARS. So in a time frame between 3 and 6 years, those antibodies and B cells had disappeared to the point of not being able to be found in the body. But what they did find 6 years after, as well as in another study 17 years after, is they found the T cell response to still be in the system, as well as when cultured in laboratory conditions, still be capable of not only defeating a SARS analog, but actually being able to defeat the SARS-CoV-2 virus itself, which it goes once again into just the potential for the SARS-CoV-2 mutate. Even if the virus mutates substantially, it's unlikely that the T cells produced will be ineffective entirely against a mutated version of the virus, which means that even a heavily mutated version of the virus should still be attenuated, reduced in negative effect by a previous vaccine. And this immunity, or attenuation, attenuation is the better word, because you won't get as bad of a response for sure if you have these T cells, and that should last at least 17 years.
So it means that people, even if we have a pretty nasty mutation, because it's not going to mutate so badly that it's unrecognizable, it could, technically speaking, but that would be highly unlikely. So in essence, what I hear you saying is that even with large mutations, it's still likely that if you've got the vaccine, or if you even had COVID itself before, you're going to have a better response to the virus the next time around, even if it's changed a lot.
Yes, that's basically what all of the reading I've done has indicated. Because with a mutation, often the successful mutations that are considered to be drastic will change the binding point for the antibody. But what the T cell latches onto isn't the same as the binding point for the antibody. And that it's not innate, but it is learned through infection, and then it remains as though it's innate. It's constantly in your body circulating, this memory T cell immunity. And even in people who had not been exposed to either SARS or SARS-CoV-2, they found 50% of them in one study had a T cell that would attack the virus when it was in the body from a previous infection, which they don't know what the cause of that was. And it didn't attack the same aspect of the cell or of the virus as the SARS-CoV or SARS-CoV-2 T cells did, which once again shows a decent level of cross immunity for beta coronaviruses in general, which is the family of the virus that SARS-CoV-2 is in.
And again, this also might relate to why some people are basically symptom-free, as far as I understand it, is they might have some sort of cross-immunity where they just never build up much of a viral load, and just they're not a big deal for them.
So, just a quick question here. Do we know what the percentage of people who get it are actually asymptomatic completely? That is something I've never been able to find a solid number on ever.
You'll never know.
I do. We'll never know for sure, like a exact percent, but I think they will. They are already narrowing down kind of like a confidence interval.
A range, yeah.
But it I think like it varies on. I think a lot of what I've seen is about half. That's honestly,
that's like the closest one I've seen.
I would circle back to is like about half, and that's from like very well informed people in the
I got
field
that from Nicholas Christakis, I think it was.
Yeah, it is about half. Some, I've seen more like a third. Some are more than like closer to 2/3. It's just I think it's very hard to tell because testing is god awful.
Yeah.
Well, interestingly, I saw an article and it was dismaying that apparently even the efficacy of the antibody tests is not great at telling you whether or not someone had SARS or COVID-19, which is disappointing. And the PCR tests are bad, and the quick tests that the states have are like next to useless. They're a little useful, but they're so bad.
Barring a breakthrough on some like highly efficient, effective test and a perfect storm of like exposure that they're able to do a mass testing on, I don't think we'll have a like very precise number. I think the estimates are probably close enough to being accurate that it's whatever, like about half is good enough. Like it, I mean, it's more at this point. It's
fair.
Like a lot of people are asymptomatic, and that's pretty much as far as like the practical implications for everything go. Like that's all you really need to know. Like, is it a substantial chunk of people that are asymptomatic? Yes or no? That's what we need to know. And for this, we do know, yes, there is.
There was so much arguing over that for months, and I just gave up on it. And then the last thing I heard was it's about 50%. I'm pretty sure that was Christakis. I hope I'm not misquoting him, but
no, I think
he was on Rogan and chatted about it, and I saw that a few days ago.
I think that's a fair assessment because he basically
he's writing a book on it.
Well, he halves his death rate for symptomatic people is about half his total death rate. So that gives you an indication of how many people he assumes are asymptomatic. So his estimate is about 1% of symptomatic individuals die, and about 0.5% of all people that get COVID-19 die. So you can infer from that he believes about half, and I think he does say somewhere in one of his two podcasts that he's had recently that's the case. yeah, again, it's not particularly important. Like we need to know the magnitude, basically, of the asymptomatic, not the precise amount.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think if a lot of the same rules would apply whether it's 20% or 60%. You know what I mean?
Yeah, in terms of the social rules, basically.
Yeah, yeah, and even the death rate is probably gonna, it's not gonna swing a huge amount of 20 versus 60. I mean, it might.
Yeah, it's
So the implications aren't like that big on that. Do you want to just, Price? Do you have anything more to add to like immunity or anything like that before we actually talk about the specific vaccines that are on the table?
One interesting finding, which has implications for immunity, though they might not be too big of implications, is that there have been patients observed to have a stronger antibody response, which you'd previously talked about, but also a more effective antibody months after the infection. And the assumption there, which they tested with various imaging techniques of the gut, is that there are reservoirs of the SARS-CoV-2 virus within the body after the disease has been quelled, and that the immune system is still basically testing its effective response out against that and improving its immune response continuously, because it's getting that sort of evolved evolution of its antibodies, such that the antibodies 6 months later are more effective at inhibiting a SARS-CoV-2 virus than the antibodies 1 month later. And that's just interesting. And also correlating with that is that in Britain, they found a reduction in antibodies in everyone they tested after a certain point, except healthcare workers who maintained antibody levels continuously throughout I believe it was a 4-month trial. And the implication there is that there's something different about healthcare workers, and the assumption that some people have jumped to, which seems reasonable, is that the healthcare workers are being re-exposed to the virus, and that's keeping their immune response strong and going, but they are no longer getting symptomatic illness.
that's really interesting.
I think, and one last thing to mention. I think what was the emphasis on antibodies. Antibody levels are not correlated, or not well correlated with disease severity in COVID-19, which is interesting because, as we said, the media focuses. I think they only know the term antibody or something. Like, they only talk about antibodies, and it just doesn't seem like a huge, or it's not the be all end all in COVID-19, because you can have very high antibody count and still have a very serious course of COVID-19 and even die. And you can have a very low antibody count and have serious COVID and vice versa. So it doesn't seem like the antibodies are the be all end all in terms of what's happening with the immune response in COVID. But there does seem to be a media kind of overemphasis or overfocus, and I just don't know if that's because antibody is a term that naturally people understand or think they understand. Like, antibody good, that means virus gone or something. But there seems to be this weird obsession with antibodies. Even in some of the things I was reading about specific vaccines, total misunderstanding of what antibodies are in some of the literature, or in some of the journalism, I guess, on this.
Yeah. And with antibodies, it's probably significantly out of date now, and it was from China. But I actually recall there was an inverse correlation where the people with the worst outcomes had more antibodies than the people with the best outcomes. And what they had thought is that they weren't mounting an effective T-cell response because their T-cell counts are lower than the people with low antibody counts, and their antibody response wasn't dealing with it, which now obviously is more understood with the antibody response being inhibited by not having germinal centers. But it was inversely correlated in a Chinese study.
Yeah. So do we want to move on to the specific?
I think
vaccines?
we should. So we can kick it off, I think, with the one that came out first. We're going to cover the major three that have gone, like the major Western three that have gone through phase 3 and are now getting moved out into the...
No, I'm only getting Sputnik 5, bro.
I love this.
Bust.
Yeah. That's the only one I'll take. Give me that Russian. Good stuff.
Well, the Russians won't take it, so it's free for us.
Exactly. Someone's got to take it.
Yeah.
It's there.
So the first one is the BioNTech, which is distributed by Pfizer. So I think what we could kind of do is just go through the high level stuff for these ones. So this BioNTech one, it's an mRNA one, and it was shown to be roughly 90% effective. So just to quickly explain what effective means, what they'll do is they'll take thousands of people for the trial, and this is the phase 3 clinical testing, and they'll break them off into two groups. One group gets a placebo, the other group gets the actual vaccine. And so what they'll do is they'll see how many people get infected, and then so they'll have the total amount of infected people from the trial, and then they'll take the amount of people who were infected that received the placebo and divide that by the total amount infected. So I believe it was, in this case, I think it was, I can't remember.
The latest numbers.
I didn't see the actual number to get the 90.
Pfizer was 170 total infected. This is at the most recent press release.
Okay, so they just updated.
162 cases in placebo and 8 in the vaccinated group. So that the latest press conference actually said 95% plus efficacy demonstrated based on the statistical analysis of those 170.
Yeah. So essentially what that means is still some people get infected when they have the virus, but I want to clear something up for people. That effectiveness means you have a great... So this is something that I think people get confused, and they say, I've seen this actually before, where they say, well, I have a 99% chance of dying or 99% chance of surviving the virus. Like, I'll just take my chances because the vaccine's only 95% effective. It's like, what you need to do is take that 95 and times it by 99, right? Like, it's...
You can't just say anecdotes like that. It hurts my soul.
Oh, but that's apparently a popular one. I've seen it around. And
well, I think you need to put numbers on it. So because it's measuring, those are two different things. So, and I think it's good to distinguish. The 95% efficacy means basically it's been shown to have a 95% chance or 95% chance or more of reducing your chance of actually getting COVID, and then that's just in completely disregarding the course of COVID you're going to get, right?
Yeah, so exactly. So you're going to be 99.9% likely to survive now. So it's a compounding effect.
Kind of. It's like if you get the vaccine, you have a 5% chance of getting getting COVID-19 compared to if you didn't get the vaccine. So if you had let's just put numbers on it. If you had a 50% chance of getting COVID-19 prior to getting vaccinated, now your chances have gone down to, what is that? 2.5%. 2.5% of getting it.
Exactly.
So if you had a 50% chance of getting it, and if you did get it, then you had a 1% chance of dying. Your chance of dying is 1 in 200. You have half the time you get it, and you have a 1% chance of dying. So there you go. Half the time you don't get it, 0% chance of dying from it if you don't get it. 1 in 200 chance of dying. Now you've gone to whatever the math is on a 2.5% chance of getting it, and a 1% chance of dying if you get it. That's your chance in dying now, which is whatever, 1 in 10,000 now.
Exactly. So it's you're actually going from what would be
1 in 4,000.
You're going from what would be like something to actually be concerned about to literally not being concerned about it. Pretty much. Like that like getting the vaccine, because it is 95% effective, it means that you are going to be way more protected. Like there's just way smaller of a chance of you getting the disease in general and then therefore dying. So it's just at that stage, it's just a no-brainer from that perspective. If you're not worrying about side effects or anything, it's just, there is no argument in this realm against not getting the vaccine, let alone other issues.
The other thing to consider too is the information we've got back. The efficacy right now is only considering who gets the virus. The seriousness and the deaths from the virus haven't been. That data hasn't been released, and it would probably need longer to actually get that data. But it could very well be that, say if they ran another trial on 100,000 people, yes, still some people in the vaccinated group are getting the virus, so it's not 100% effective at preventing. But you might have 0 deaths so it could actually prevent you further from getting as serious, of course, of virus.
Yeah, it would depend on whether the 5% that can still get it are still getting it because their body didn't develop any immune response, or if their body's developed immune response was simply too weak to make them immune.
Yeah, exactly.
But it could be enough of an immune response to really knock it down. So
exactly.
And every indication would be that if we did get, I think all the information that we have so far would indicate that if we did take a look at the seriousness of the cases that each group got and the death in each group, it's probably going to show even more efficacy in the vaccine in terms of reducing disease severity and death.
Yeah.
There's very little pathway that would be the reverse. So,
well, I don't think it couldn't be worse than 95% is what you have to know, because if 5% of the people don't develop any immunity, then they're going to have the same sort of course. And the odds are some of them are developing some immunity, and it's going to help them, even though it's not a full immunity.
Yeah, so that's what I mean by it's probably at least 95%
efficacious.
Efficacious, and then there's potential for some even more upside once we get more information. So you really have to consider that the vaccine data that's come out is just, in terms of phenomenal. Efficacy, is amazingly effective. And if you're not concerned about any other health side effects of it, it's just a no-brainer to take.
Just to frame we're talking 90-95%. To put that into perspective, the flu vaccine is about 50%.
It ranges heavily, but that's a rough usually where it sits.
But what the FDA wanted for emergency approval, this is what they demanded at a minimum, was 50%. And the NHS in Britain wanted 60%.
Yeah,
and we're getting 90% plus.
Yeah, it's like Fauci said directly that he would have been very happy with 75%. So over 90 to 95% effective is just amazing. So that's the BioNTech.
We should just cover a couple more things about BioNTech. It is a pain in the ass because it needs to be kept at -70 during transportation, -70 Celsius, which is very fucking cold.
That's extremely hard to do with just even, you need very advanced refrigeration units, not just normal ones.
Lots of labs and
that's -94 Fahrenheit for freedom units.
Fahrenheit is just actually the dumbest thing that has been.
Oh, it gets even more confusing when you go negative.
Yeah, exactly. I know. It drives me nuts.
So let's not quote the Fahrenheits for. If you're
at the risk of alienated the no American,
you can Google it yourself. This is something that I didn't see in the news, but I did see on the press release, was that it can be stored up to 5 days at 2 to 8 Celsius. in a refrigerator once it's arrived after the cold chain.
I saw that with regards to the NHS's protocol for distribution is that they can move it 4 times because they think moving it intrinsically is dangerous to its stability.
Yeah.
4 times at -70, and once they begin delivering it, it's in that refrigerator, and they need to deliver all the doses within 5 days.
Yeah. So the practicality of this vaccine is pretty rough. Like logistically, it's going to be a headache. The other thing that I noted, it was about $20-ish a dose is what some people were speculating it was going to cost. So it's not a cheap one either, and that's I don't know how the cost that was including the storage and transportation costs with the really extreme cold chain, but that was what the best estimation I could find was. And the other thing that I noted was they think that they're going to have about 15 to 20 million units by the end of 2020. So they're ramping up production pretty hard. And hundreds of millions by like Q1, like end of Q1 in 2021.
I guess
that's maybe I think over $1 billion by the end of 2021. 1 billion doses.
Yeah, and
anything else to add to that you guys discovered?
Not really. Yeah, it's good shit, I guess. The big.
Oh, I guess the British rollout's starting in like 10 days now.
Yeah, they already got it.
If everything goes according to plan.
Yep.
And okay. Doses arriving in the U.S. already. I saw that as well.
Yeah, they're moving.
It's not approved in the U.S. or the U.K. as far as I know.
I think they're planning on it for December 7th, and potentially between December 7th and 10th is when they expect the approval to go through, and like basically the minute it goes through, they're ready to go.
Yeah. So, and that's the U.S. as well, pretty much as well. They are just waiting on FDA approval, and then as soon as that happens, then they start.
Well, they can just start dosing immediately. So we can talk about Moderna next. So that one has also been proven out to be 94.5% effective. So they were doing, it was roughly 30,000 people that they had in their trials. 95 people got infected with COVID, and 90 of them were in the placebo. And 11 of those cases were serious, but the 5 members that got it in the vaccinated group, none of them were serious. So that's a good sign. But again, it was only 5 people, so it's hard to tell. But it does point at least in the direction that there could be some benefits, even if you still catch COVID. Yeah,
well, I guess we should just that's an early indication, but
it's just
actual information, like none of the. As far as I know, none of the actual vaccine manufacturers themselves have said anything about death or severity.
No, they
haven't. So that
haven't.
means they don't have the internal data to support it. If they did, they would probably be releasing it, would be my guess.
Yeah.
Well, they're wise enough not to make any claims that are completely unsupported statistically, which they can't be with that small number of cases.
Yeah, I think.
Or even if they are, like, I could imagine the 11 actually being statistically significant at some level, but my guess is it's just not worth it right now. Like, it's just not solid enough in their mind finding to bother with it.
Do another 100,000 person study, and you might be able to say something. But I would agree with that. It's just not worth it.
It's a little better. The Moderna one is a little better for logistics because it's -20 storage. It's 30-day shelf life. They have a similar production schedule, 20 million by end of 2020, $500 million to $1 billion by end of 2021. It's the most expensive, I think, of the proposed vaccines. It's between $32 and $37. So basically what that means, not that probably any listeners would really be in this situation, but if you're in a modern economy country that's, fairly wealthy, those numbers probably don't sound like much to you. like, oh, $20 a dose, like what's the problem? But it's those numbers are actually really meaningful, obviously, to less wealthy countries, and they're not going to be able to afford those numbers,
especially when you have a billion people like India or something like that. Which actually brings us to AstraZeneca's. That's the Oxford vaccine. This one's a little bit odd. It had a 90% effective rate when given a half dose and then a full dose at least a month later, but only 62% effective.
I don't think it's even worth bringing up their 90%, except as there may potentially be a better dosing method. But that 90% didn't include anyone over the age of 55.
And as far as I know, the half dose, one dose was an accident.
Yeah, it was an accident.
So it wasn't planned. So that just gives me all the more reason to doubt it. They're doing a major international study on the half dose, one dose now, and then we'll have data in like a month or so, probably. Because the overall efficacy was 70%.
Yeah. So
I think is what we should use like as the shorthand efficacy. I don't all the stuff around the 90% is sketchy to me. I don't like it. I don't like how it happened as an accident. I don't like that it was under age 55. I don't like how they announced it, that it seemed like this was an intentional dosing regimen, which was actually just a giant fuck up on their part. So all that considered, I just think it's bad practice for them to even claim that or even bring that up. 70%.
Yeah, 70. Exactly. Yeah, that's reasonable. This one is a lot cheaper. It's $2.50 a dose, which for countries that are not nearly as well off, this is huge. The company also said that they will not be taking profit at all on it. They're going to run it at cost so they can get it out to as many people as possible. And this thing it doesn't require a full cold chain. It just requires a cooling chain. That means it only needs about 2 degrees Celsius to be stored at. So it's probably going to be the go-to option, at least for now, until another vaccine that is like better in the other respects to dose.
Well, it's likely going to be it'll be along the same lines as this. I haven't seen any information that there would be a more efficacious viral vector vaccine, although there could be, but it just 70% is good. Like it sounds bad compared to 90 to 95%.
You're forgetting my Sputnik 5. Oh my god, that's 91.4%. Actually goes up to over 95% after 42 days, as per Russia's numbers. So
and it gives you superpowers. So
the funniest thing I saw was some journalist that made the connection that both were in the 90% if you included that special case of the Oxford one. Like, oh, maybe there's something to this. I was like, probably not.
Yeah. So this one here, I think it'll be really useful for the nations that aren't as well off, just because you don't have that infrastructure needed.
And not even just well off, just like not, even countries that might be able to afford it but don't have the cold chain. It might just
you can't build that. Like you can't throw up a minus 75 degree cold chain like up to none of it or something like that. It's just not gonna happen. You're gonna have to use something else.
Up to none of it, you just walk.
That's true. Just throw it out. Drop it out.
Throw it outside the truck,
Yeah, exactly. He's hanging outside the door. Yeah, but I can imagine that'll be the vaccine that most people on the planet get probably in 2021.
Yeah.
That or that style, like that fashion of vaccine is just ideal for mass inoculation.
Yeah. And that one is the another term they use is a adenovirus vector. But the
adenovirus is the monkey cold.
Yeah,
just fancy word for monkey cold.
And I as far as I know, the not memeing, the Russian Sputnik 5 is also attenuated
it's also adenovirus. It's the exact same virus with the exact same attempt at modification.
And so is the CanSino Biologics that's being used by the Chinese military.
Because I
which
guess
we have no data on.
the thing with the genetic community in the world is like there's certain viruses that get studied for whatever reason and everyone understands. And the adenovirus is clearly one of those ones that's easy to genetically manipulate. And it's not found in humans, so there's no immune response to the virus that would kill it before it gave you vaccine potential. And it was easy to put a spike protein onto.
Yeah, so I think that's also, I think, similar to how the CanSino Biologics Chinese one works, although that one is very, like, can't find hardly shit all on it because
it's China.
State secret.
It's Chinese. All the Chinese vaccines are, well, at least I couldn't rustle up good, reliable information on them.
To be fair, I sorted by not China when I was looking for data, just because their data is so suspect surrounding the coronavirus.
Yeah, it's not like you're getting.
They authorize limited use. Both the Russian and two Chinese vaccines are authorized for limited use, which is like a higher level of basically authorization than phase 3.
Yeah, so it's further than any of the ones in the States or in the West, really.
China has submitted their main I think it's called the Sinovac or something, their main vaccine for like Western style phase 3 that's being conducted, but it's not done yet. But that, as far as I know, that process and the data we get out of that will be reliable because it'll go through the same channels as every other vaccine that's like the all the Western vaccines have gone through as well. But they didn't do that before they started using it on their citizens. But those phase 3s will come back, and so but we won't know that probably for a month or two whether or not there's what the efficacy of the Chinese vaccine is at all. Just
it's good to know that they're actually participating in the international scientific community.
Well, they want to sell it, right? So that one, as far as I know, the CanSino one is not going through that. But yeah, maybe that's changed. But they have two different vaccines, basically. One for their military that was like super fast tracked back in May.
Yeah, they just rammed that thing through.
And then there's a newer one that's being given to their state employees as well. So, do we want to cover any more specifics on any of the vaccines?
I don't have anything more that just won't get kind of bogged down in the weeds a bit. So I think I'm okay to move on.
There might actually be some just general stuff aside from the ones we've talked about.
I was going to say not the 3. There's some fun ones that we could talk about that are not directly.
There's there's 2 other ones that I think are probably might be important. One is the Johnson & Johnson, which is currently in phase 3 with results predicted by end of 2020. And I also think that's a viral vector, and they are predicting they're predicting 1 billion doses by 2021 as well.
And so the biggest thing with the Johnson & Johnson is that their goal from the get-go was to do it in 1 dose, whereas every vaccine we've talked about so far has been 2 doses, although I don't know with the Chinese, but every other one is 2 doses, I believe a week apart, 5 days apart.
It depends. It depends. The Pfizer I think is 3 weeks.
Oh, okay. It adds another layer of logistical difficulty when you need to redose the same people you've dosed at
and you're going to get non-compliance 100%. That's
we haven't gone into that for mRNAs yet. They're going to be rough for the boys.
Yeah, I think we can cover that though, like more with like compliance and whatnot.
The anti-vaxxing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
last of the vaccine call.
I really think that my boys. Oh crap! I just lost it. But My boys in North Korea, they're going to be the ones that pull through big.
Oh, well, they have to get some test subjects, though, from outside North Korea.
I know.
They don't have any cases.
Exactly. It's hard. They're just struggling finding people that come into North Korea to be tested. State Commission of Science and Technology. That they have started their clinical trials. I don't know why you would doubt it, but
North Korea. Hopefully they stole some good data.
It's all just made up Excel sheets.
Yeah, so I think it is actually worth just mentioning that aside from the ones we've covered, there's like dozens and dozens of other candidates. There's 38 currently in phase 1, 17 in phase 2, 13 in phase 3, and 6 limited approvals, which are mostly the Chinese and Russian ones that we've talked about. So basically, there's probably going to be another, out of all those that we've talked about, there's probably going to be another half dozen to a dozen viable vaccines.
That come through that are different ways of doing it.
All the attention has been on the ones that are, showing their efficacy early. But it will be probably what happens is there's going to be a lot of data collected on who does well with what vaccine, and then people are going to get dosed with the best vaccine for them as best as they can, and it's all going to run into some. There's going to be a whole bunch of other things to consider.
To my understanding, the demographic data hasn't been released on the 3 vaccines that we know the efficacy of yet. So they could have varying, say one's best in seniors and one just really doesn't do much in seniors. Then obviously that changes your rollout protocol.
Yeah. So I think we should probably just tie a bow on the actual information on the vaccines and that kind of thing, and talk about more like the rollout, and especially as it relates to the Canadian situation. I mean, America gets most of the news, but I think the Canadian situation is actually pretty interesting and worth talking about for us Canadians. Where do you guys want to start with that?
I think logistical rollout is probably the shortest topic. That would be more difficult for Canada than most developed nations. Well, probably than any other developed nation.
I don't necessarily agree, other than just like I guess geographically it'd be tough. I don't think that'll actually be. I think that'll be overblown for, like, maybe I'm wrong, but I just don't see how that will be that hard for them to figure out. We have
putting it in the context of the NHS system of distribution, which they might be just saying this in order to, I don't know why. There could be ulterior motives behind the NHS doing what they're doing, but basically they're delivering to the hospitals and dosing their workers, and they're saying it's too difficult logistically to get the virus at the moment to care homes, and impossible to get it to elderly people who aren't in care homes. Like, that's not even on their radar at the moment.
It's just too difficult to try to segment out the population. Say, okay, all of the elderly, you have to show up at X time to get the dose, right?
Well, I imagine that has to be what they'll end up doing. But they've got a big stew going on because they want to medicate their healthcare workers, and advocates for old people are saying that they're leaving the old people out to dry. And they promised to give the old people vaccines, and now they're using these logistical concerns as a smokescreen.
See, to me, that just smacks of stupidity, because your healthcare workers are going to be the ones who expose the most. It's like the frontline staff, I think, are like the number one priority, since they're the ones that are always in contact.
That's not the concern, right? This is the same. I mean, that's a totally believable scenario that Price just outlined, where the kind of the people in the know that the best people to give it to is the healthcare workers, but the general public is stupid, And they think, oh, you have to give it to my granny because she needs it more than the doctors because
the doctor who's dealing with the COVID patients.
Well, in Britain, they have an official release of like who's tiered where for the vaccine, and healthcare workers and the elderly are tied at the top of the tier list. So they're upset that the healthcare workers is getting favoritism.
And
again, it's probably that's very accurate that it could be the same as masks, where they're saying masks don't work because they wanted to save it for the healthcare workers. Now they know. Now they're saying, logistically we can't give it to old people when they know they probably could, but they want to give it to healthcare workers, and they're probably right to give it to healthcare workers, but they're just lying for the
they don't.
Yeah, like that's kind of the feeling I get, because like the logistical problems they describe seem like they should have straightforward solutions. Even only being able to move it 4 times, you can get it to a nearby hospital with 4 moves.
Like put it in the fucking parking lot in a fridge, and have people drive to the parking lot and then shoot it in their arm. It's not fucking hard. I could do it. I could figure that out.
Well, 80-year-olds often can't drive.
Well, most of them can, and you can also take a fucking bus. Like, it's not that hard. Like it.
At some point, you're going to have to get to the location. You can't send out all the government workers all around London to vax people. It's just not.
But what I'm saying is that, in a country like in Great Britain, they have the technology to get someone from their house to a hospital. Yeah. It exists. That is not a good reason. That is not a good reason at all. It exists. Don't give me that shit. You can figure out how to get an 80-year-old from her house to a fucking hospital. They've done it before. I've seen it. So, yeah, I've seen old people in hospitals. So clearly, there's some sort of mechanism to get them there. So I don't think the actual rollout. I mean, there is going to be a lot of interesting infighting going on, like who should get it, who's going to get it. I think politically it has been kind of funny listening to Canadian politicians, especially Trudeau, dance around the subject, and it's kind of like the Spider-Man meme in Canada, where conservatives pointing the finger at the liberals pointing it back, and they're both kind of caught with their pants down, because I saw a interview with the intergovernment affairs official in Canada getting asked about why we don't have domestic capacity, and he was quick to point out that domestic capacity for vaccine manufacturing was lost under the Conservatives. And then the interviewer made a good point that their government, the Liberal government, wasn't just elected, it was elected over 5 years ago. So, that's
a lot of
time. So it's possible that during that time they could have rebuilt capacity, and the minister dodged that question completely. And I actually don't really fault the Liberals or the Conservatives really in terms of like losing our capacity or not building it up. And I mean, even if they would have, definitely they probably would have built up more traditional capacity for the older types of vaccines if they would have built it up, and that's not going to help. Like the mRNA facilities that were built for the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines, those were started like almost 3 years ago being built. So it's not like there's just not really much you can fault the government for on this. It's
like, do you really want like Canada to be investing heavily into hypothetical vaccine technology that will only come to fruition if there's a worldwide pandemic that may or may not happen? Like mRNA vaccines have gone like kind of like low key. They could work to just the bee's knees in 8 months. Yeah,
exactly. You would be strung out as a politician by the public if you were, dumping hundreds, if not billions of dollars into that. They'd be, you lose your job over it because people would be like, "This is ridiculous. What a silly expenditure. It's not going to happen." And then of course it does, but hindsight is 2020.
that might not even be accurate. Like, I don't know if people would rebel against biotechnology investment. I just think, like, it's just not something that you could really fault the government for. You know, it's hindsight 2020 in a nutshell. Like, it's so stupid to, pick apart something that just not foreseeable. It's like no one, as far as I know, like no one in the mainstream was clamoring for Canada to build vaccine capacity for at any point in the last 2 decades. You can't just say, oh, well, why didn't you do it? It's like,
Yeah.
no one was thinking about it. And to be fair to the Liberal government, they did go full ham on ordering vaccines. We have the government has ordered 400 million doses, pre-ordered 400 million doses, which would be 9 doses per Canadian. So if
a lot of microchips.
If all of the doses were delivered that they ordered, that is the most per capita in the world. And actually, the Canadian government has been criticized by other governments for being basically vaccine greedy.
Yeah, I was going to say, probably getting a little bit of
ordering and being like basically dicks for taking up so many vaccines.
I'm pretty sure that Canada's actually going to give a lot of those away, though.
Well, that's what we say.
And of the 7, well, we're probably just not going to get full orders of all 7 that we pre-ordered, basically. It's just not likely that all 7 are going to pan out. We did pre-order Pfizer and Moderna, which we are expected to get 6 million doses by Q1 2021. So
that's pretty good.
3 million Canadians will be foreseeably vaccinated with those between the Pfizer and the Moderna. And recently, Trudeau came out and said the majority of Canadians can be expected to be vaccinated by September of 2021.
Yeah, which is actually huge, considering.
Yeah, there's a lot of variables at play. I think we were talking earlier in the podcast about when this is all going to be kind of back to new normal, but I guess we're not going back to new normal. We're building back better, or resetting, or whatever the fuck you want to call it.
It's the Great Reset, which is communist takeover.
We're making the world great again.
We're building back better. So we're going to be back to better. When we're going to be back to better is questionable, but I actually honestly think things might go back to normal by next spring. Like, not joking, like 2021 spring, because basically I think this is my assessment of things, and maybe I'm totally off base, but it seems like, all these countries in the Northern Hemisphere are having like a second wave of COVID, coincidentally, right around the time that we always get a fucking influenza, dump, flu season. And Australia, shockingly, is doing very well. Like, oh, so weird. That I don't know. What are those guys doing over? Oh, it's summer there. No shit. So I really just think like people are blaming like the huge surge in cases on whatever their local government or leaders doing, blah blah blah. And it's really just like, it's flu season, guys. Like, get over it. Like, we're gonna get pounded.
Yeah,
and
I definitely think that it's possible, especially if you dose 3 million Canadians by next quarter, or like Q1 2021, and then it turns into the summer. You've actually already got a good chunk of the Canadians immunized, and then you go into summer and it's not nearly as big of a deal, but things are pretty much back to normal, and then the majority of people are dosed by the fall. You're kind of back to what would be kind of normal by then.
Yeah, I think you're honestly going to see like things are going to peak around the next 2 months, and then they're going to kind of slowly decline in the spring, and then by like April, May of 2021, things are going to start ramping up to basically normal by summer months of 2021. Like, and I mean, we can talk about this later, but yeah, I just the vaccines are just going to play into that natural flu cycle heavily, and it's just going to be, you're going to be unable to get people to cooperate with any sort of lockdown measures or anything like that once the vaccines start rolling out.
Oh yeah, people are just done.
They're just going to say fuck this and go back to normal life. So I think that's my prediction, at least, that regardless of what the government says, life is back to normal by next summer, basically.
Yeah, I haven't nearly thought as hard about it, but I can't see anything that you said that I disagree with. all sounds very reasonable to me.
Yeah.
Well, we didn't really cover the actual rollout logistics or anything like that. Do you want to dive a little bit deeper into that, or do you want to move on to something else?
I personally don't
there's-
have much to say about the cold chain or anything like that. I don't know if you guys know about the cold chain or have comments about the cold chain or how pharmacies
The
are
only
going to get
thing
it.
I was going to touch on is, and I mean, you do have to grant that the Brits are not overselling the logistical chain, which is granting quite a bit, but it may be difficult to get the vaccine to the rural areas of Canada relatively. Like, it could get to the cities where everyone lives anyway, pretty much immediately as soon as we have it. And then it might take a while to figure out the logistics to get it into the rural areas.
I don't disagree. Again, I think the big thing to touch on is two things to touch on there is like the bigger risk of COVID is probably in the city centers. So, I mean, that's already kind of
100%.
And then two is like, especially in Canada, like people that actually live in rural situations is probably like 1% of the population. Like people that are not within a driving distance of a somewhat decent sized population center is just, I mean, for those people it sucks, and there's definitely going to be huge squabbles. And I think that actually might play into like a lot of the First Nations issues in Canada. It's going to probably some of the hardest places to get the vaccine will be to First Nations.
Yeah, like it's not
to reserves.
numbers. In terms of numbers, it shouldn't be a big deal. But like other countries don't have a situation like that at all. Like we have with just the remoteness of some of our communities.
A few hundred people living literally where they don't have electricity, or basically don't have electricity. Yeah.
Yeah, but I also feel like, I also feel like spread there is easier to control to make sure that it doesn't get in there. So long as you're careful, they might be.
Well,
able
that's
to
a big thing with the territories. They just basically lock down the territories for any travel because you don't want any COVID spread up there.
Yeah, exactly. So I think there will be ways to mitigate it in Canada, but I do feel it'll turn into a bit of a political nightmare, just because it always does.
I mean, maybe we can touch on this later, but I think it's going to be way worse in the States because.
Oh, they're already fighting over it. It's ridiculous.
Well, who voluntarily is not going to take the vaccine predominantly?
Yeah, and which states are having the worst spread and outcomes? Like,
well, it's gonna be, unfortunately, it's gonna be minority groups that are the least likely to take the vaccine because of distrust and animosity or whatever you want to say. Whether or not that's justified, whatever, that's a different conversation. But then it's going to be like a self-perpetuating cycle where the minority communities in the U.S. and probably Canada too will have this as well, to a lesser degree, but still meaningfully won't take the vaccine. Then they'll get.
Did you see
COVID.
any polls on like demographics like that, like minorities? Because the ones I saw
one news
were
report saying that. Far as that basically, I think it was African Americans and Hispanics were more skeptical of taking the vaccine than.
I saw that too. The claim was that it's not more than it's not statistically significant, but like it definitely was more.
So,
but I think the research is pretty rough still.
That people have actively looked into that I've seen is the political divide.
It's 100% screwed. Yeah, it 100% skews in the way that you think it's going to skew. Like, it absolutely does. What I found was Democrats are, I think it was like, where is it exactly? But it was 92% of Democrats saying it is important to vaccinate their kids. Only 79% of Republicans saying the same. So it's not a huge difference, but it's still enough that...
I was more surprised with the COVID-specific poll that found 18% of Democrats said they wouldn't get a COVID vaccine, which is way higher than I was expecting for that segment.
So I did quite a bit of... Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, and then 33% of Republicans responded they wouldn't take the vaccine, and then 31% of independents said they wouldn't take a vaccine.
And then 98% of libertarians.
And then the Green Party said inject into my eyeballs.
Don't respond to pollsters.
Yeah. The thing that I was actually really surprised with is just generally speaking, it seems like the large majority of people who are skeptical, like the vast majority of people who are skeptical of the vaccine, you're saying they're not going to do it, they're worried about the safety and the efficacy. That's like the major concern. So it's not like there's a huge anti-vaxxer population that's just not willing to do it.
Adds up with, as you say, like Democrats consider vaccines important, and yet there's still quite a few Democrats that are not willing to get a COVID vaccine.
Yeah, exactly. It's if you look at the United
deep dive
States,
that survey. I read a journal report on it, so I don't know exactly how they were phrasing questions. But
yeah, so if you look at just generally speaking, it's interestingly, it's France is the worst. It's like if a vaccine for COVID-19 were available, I would get it, and then it's strongly agree, somewhat agree.
I thought Russia was the worst.
Russia wasn't in the study he's talking about, I don't think. Russia and France are both almost the same. Like they're both almost 50%.
Yeah, they're really skeptical. So like generally across the entire globe, this is Ipsos, which is like a huge market research company. Across the entire globe, it was 73% of respondents said that they were some strongly agree or somewhat agree with getting it, with 27% saying they somewhat disagree and strongly disagree. And in Canada, the numbers are 76, so pretty close to the general one. I noticed Germany's lower, it's 69, which I found surprising. Same with Japan. But China in this one's 85%, India's 87%. Those are the highest.
You can't have your freaking social credit score tank.
Well, the one I saw in China was obviously a different methodology, but it was 97%. I
would say it's just like you're going to have big differences between these types of studies. Just because it's so hard.
If Xi brings a vaccine and a gun to your apartment,
you take one.
Will you take it? Wow, 97% will? That's so crazy.
Yeah, shocking that they took that over a 9mm.
Your options are to have your welded into your house until you starve to death, or take the vaccine. Are you going to take the vaccine? Compliance rates are really high in China. That's so weird.
You wind up in a Uyghur death camp. So the interesting thing though, it's like which best describes why you would not take a vaccine for COVID-19, and the baseline is you would not get a vaccine if available. So that's like the 27% globally, and the vast majority of people, they say I am worried about the side effects, or I'm worried about the vaccine moving too fast through clinical trials, and that's like usually eats up like at least 2/3, if not more. And then another small chunk eats up like I don't think it will be effective. The risk, and then another even smaller chunk is the risk of me getting COVID-19 is low. It's only actually a pretty small chunk that says like I'm against vaccines in general. So one of the things I noticed like from my research was it actually, despite there being a pretty big chunk of the population saying, especially in somewhere like Canada, like 27% of the people saying that they're unlikely to take it, the majority of them are saying it because they're kind of scared about getting it.
That was surprising to you?
No. Like, it's surprising in the sense that it's like I would have thought that like even in the States that the anti-vaxxer population would be larger. Like I was thinking it'd be like good 10% or something like that.
Positively surprising.
Yeah, it's positively surprising. Like I thought it would have been even worse. I'm
shocked that you found this surprise. I'm surprised that you're surprised because like the anti-vax movement is not big. It's like the flat Earth movement, although it's probably much better subscribed than flat Earth. But it's like 10% of Twitter that believes in it, which is 10% of the U.S. So you know what I mean? Like it's just a fraction
like
of
1% or
yeah. But I would have thought it was even bigger than that. Like I didn't think it was going to be like 30% of the population, but I would have thought it would have been like larger than what
If I
actually
was to
came
guess,
out.
the actual number of people that don't vaccinate is well under 10%. Like, unless I'm wrong, I don't actually know.
It
Never
couldn't
looked it
be
up.
over 10%. That just seems insane. Like, this is totally off anything I've researched, but my gut would be under 1%, but I have too much faith in humans, probably.
Yeah, I think that's true. My guess
Yeah.
would be in like the 2 to 3% range of people that don't vaccinate,
Sounds pretty reasonable.
based on like the number of people that I know that are completely retarded. Like, that's just all I'm going off of. Like, how many write-offs do I know? And that's like probably 2 or 3%.
Well, I actually know some anti-vaxxers personally, so maybe I'm skewed and I'm embittered about it. But
Well, I just think that like the amount of people in say Canada that won't get vaccinated if the vaccine initial rollout goes fine, probably very small.
Yeah,
Probably
see-
gonna be like maybe like 30-40% in the first kind of like like, you know, in Q1 we're only gonna get a few million doses. You're gonna have more than enough people willing to take it.
Yeah.
That it won't matter,
oh yeah, I'd
right?
sign up immediately.
And then when those 3 million people take it, and by the time we get more in Q2, and those 3 million people are fine, the holdouts are gonna just start falling off, right? And you're gonna
Yeah,
at the end of the day, you're gonna have the U.S. might be more. You might have something like, maybe you might have a meaningful percentage of people like that's kind of annoyingly high for the COVID vaccine, especially since it got politicized. Like, I think the problem in the U.S. is the politicization of it. You might have something like, you know, 5, 10, 15% of the population that won't get it quick enough. But I really don't think pretty much anywhere. I think developing countries are just going to be a lot worse.
I just want to say, in the States, like, it is convenient that the vaccine official rollout will start under the Trump administration, because, like, on a very fundamental level, like, people are going to be, that would be less receptive to it, are going to be somewhat more receptive to getting it from Trump, I would think.
Well, I was going to mention earlier, it's like, man, Operation Warp Speed was basically just not doing anything about COVID, so they had more cases to like prove efficacy of the vaccine. Pretty
Man,
genius,
that was
honestly.
the real warp speed.
Exactly.
Chess.
Yeah, like Trump's like, we just won't do anything, and then lots of people will get COVID, and then the vaccine companies will have tons to go on, and then boom.
We're making
bottom.
huge money.
Early approval of the vaccines, and we'll have vaccines under my watch. So it worked out.
Still
Warp
lost.
speed to the vaccines.
Exactly.
So yeah, do we want to cover like a little bit more of just what we think the general trends will be in terms of rollouts and people getting it?
I just want to say, I hope the messaging around the side effects from the vaccine is clear and transparent, and it's not like, oh, here, come take this vaccine, and
It won't do
maybe
anything.
give you, it has severe side effects in 0.01% of people, and then like 10% of people get knocked on their ass for a day or two and go on social media and freak out about it.
Yeah, I was gonna mention that too. Like,
Yeah.
and I don't think it'll be, that messaging won't be that important for this vaccine. I don't think, like, fool me once, right? I think going forward, that type of like failure of messaging will.
Well, no, because you're also doing the booster shot, right? So if you have non-compliance because they get knocked on their ass, and then they have to do the booster
Yeah,
shot, and they
It's
say no.
usually the second. It's usually the second shot that has worse side effects.
Oh, I heard the opposite.
Okay, although, what study was I looking at? It was a general study on mRNA, but they said your body, their assumption, they used animal models. They did find in people that it was worse on the second shot, but in animal models, it was the lipid coating that they were reacting to. So the immune system reacted to it, and then it reacted to it worse the second time.
Interesting. I saw in the I think it was an interview regarding the vaccine that generally people feel shittier on the first shot, and the second shot is a little bit better.
I absolutely think it would be really bad going forward if if they lied, because I do think that the government has burned up a good chunk of the trust and goodwill that it built out.
You'll have a shitty day afterwards, probably. And like worst case scenario, they don't have a shitty day, and they're like, "Oh, that was nothing."
Yeah, exactly.
Over.
But you do, like, my point is, I think the Canadian medical system and the government has damaged its trust a bit because of some of the stupid shit they said about masks and protests. I think a lot of people looked at that and said, why would I listen to you after you said masks don't work and now you're forcing me to wear them? You say don't go out, don't leave your house, and now it's okay to protest, but I'm not allowed to hang out with friends. So I think if they lie again about it, or they downplay it heavily to the point where it could cause that another break in trust, that would be, I think, very bad for the general institutional relationship between the public and the government. So I really hope they don't do that, because it's just, just tell people, it's like, hey, yes, you might have a crappy day. It's not that common for you to have a crappy day, though. So, and,
I think it's just a level of crap is probably, I think, from what I saw, is like lots of people have minor stuff, but the number of people that have a really, really knocked on your ass day is not very high, but lots of people have arm soreness and redness and
but that's standard vaccine.
Effectively, everyone will have some arm soreness unless your immune system isn't working right in the first place. Because your immune system will exhibit an inflammatory response to an mRNA vaccine.
Well, yeah, but you get that with I got my flu shot and you got a bit of that.
It's not the same sort of response, but you can get some side effects to a flu shot as well.
Yeah, so I would worry about the messaging to a certain extent as well. I think they probably will fuck it up.
I just think if they
given their track record,
wrong, it would lead to faster overall acceptance.
Exactly. It's what you said. Price is exactly
ramp up
right.
Faster, I think. I think it would be initially a little bit lower, and then it would ramp up faster. Whereas if they lie about it, it'll be a little bit higher in the beginning, but it'll ramp.
Yeah, and you might have the non-compliance for the second one, which could cause a whole bunch of problems. I think exactly what you said is right, Price. The fact that you get a few of these people who have a really shit day and they go on social media and they bitch about it, that goes viral, and you get enough of that going.
I'm just persistently disappointed in human beings and how they communicate on social networks. Well, I've never actually been positively. I always learn something that makes me sadder about it. People just spread misinformation so rampantly.
Well, yeah, you get to see a lot of that. But yeah, I think if they don't screw it up, it will be all right, and people will get it. And I think adoption here in Canada, because we didn't have it politicized like it was in the States nearly as much. There's definitely a little bit of it, but I don't think
we just somehow managed to get a contingent of the Canadian population turn into Americans through cultural fucking propaganda by America, and
brainwashing by the news.
Yeah, we just have a segment of the population that just mimics America in every respect. So we do have a bit of it, but
both on the left and the right, I noticed.
Our overall conservative messaging, though, I believe, is basically that the vaccines aren't coming fast enough and they aren't getting rolled out fast enough. To do a better job, rather than trying to question the efficacy.
They're not coming fast enough. They're not being rolled out, and the main criticism is Trudeau is not answering when, basically.
Yeah.
Which is a fairly reasonable criticism, because he's basically not said dick about the actual official rollout in terms of specifics, dates, or he's just said once it's approved, people will get it. It's we knew that.
No, we thought you were just going to dump it into the ocean.
What did you think was going to happen when it was approved? Yeah, exactly. We're just going to burn all our doses for fun?
What we're actually doing is we're putting them all into a vault, and then we're switching the Canadian dollar to being backed on COVID vaccines.
No, we're collecting them and selling them later when they're worth more. So, that's how we're gonna pay off our fucking $250 billion COVID tab or whatever it's up to. 500 billion.
I thought I was gonna like half a trillion
300 some or something.
It's just So I don't know. What do you guys personally think on will you get a vaccine the second it's available? Will you wait? Will you?
I don't mind being the guinea pig if that's.
I'd be pretty hyped to get an mRNA vaccine after all the research I've done on it.
Yeah, I would take it, but I would definitely be more than happy to wait to give it to people who need it. Like, I just want the rollout to be done in the most efficient way to stop the spread as possible, just to clamp this down as fast as possible. So instead of doing the feels good, like, oh, got to give it to all the old people, if that is not the most effective way, then I only hope that Canada's not so brain dead to take a way more inefficient route just for the publicity's sake. But I have zero faith there.
I have some faith. I don't know.
I really don't.
Trudeau listens usually to people that tell him stuff, and I think he will get the advice that, giving it to people that are likely to spread it is better, and he'll probably do that. And it seems like everything's going to be ran federally for the vaccines, even though our health system is provincially
I think they need the coordination, don't they?
Coordination and all that stuff is done federally. The purchasing of all the vaccines, all that stuff is federally controlled, so it won't be piecemeal provincial bullshit. It will be
with some of them doing a good job and then others just sucking.
Them provincial governments deciding all the who gets it when, and it being a nightmare. Different provinces do different things and people going to other provinces, blah blah blah. It's all going to be federally administered, so that I think that's good. So I don't know. I think I'm kind of torn between, if taking one of the good ones, like the Moderna and Pfizer seem very effective, so taking either of those as soon as it's available would be probably, I don't know, versus, I'm also not opposed to waiting a little bit because not high risk in terms of.
Yeah, if it's better for us, if it was better for me to wait because that's what would actually help out the society more, then screw it, I can wait. But if I was given the choice without that issue to think about, then I would definitely just take it. Screw it. I'll be one of the big first wave to see if there's any issues that are rare that weren't discovered. I don't care.
Your eyeball pops out.
Yeah, well, that'd probably be for the better. Sue Moderna.
Turn into a
potato.
Oh, that's actually, man, that's just another good reason to get on the vaccines early.
Sue Moderna, sue the Canadian government, sue the provincial government, sue the WHO, sue the CDC,
sue China,
sue
the FDA, sue Trump, sue Biden.
Oh, I'd be suing Biden, and I will be suing Kamala Harris personally. Just blame everything on Kamala.
Just sue everything.
Why not?
Giuliani.
Yeah, I'd actually
terrible in the courtroom.
I was gonna say I could go battle him in court personally. That'd be fun.
Yeah.
Watch him leak hair dye.
That's actually something we haven't touched on, which is an interesting point. Will be, especially in America, you have to assume that people are going to litigate over when they got the vaccine.
Oh my god, yeah.
There's going to be someone who dies, and then they're going to sue the government and sue everyone for not giving them the vaccine on time.
It's literally going to be a shit show.
You just know it's going to happen. The U.S.
There's if you can imagine it, there's a lawsuit about it.
It's like Rule 34 for porn. If it exists, there's porn of it. It's Rule 67.
Great analogy.
Yeah. That's an old throwback for internet culture.
I think it's more relevant now than it's ever been.
Probably.
Move on.
I just think overall, not to be too optimistic, but basically based on what I've seen, yeah, the vaccines in combination just with like what's going on is like for developed countries that can get first in line for vaccines, this thing's basically over by next year.
Yeah, that was something. Like, do we want to kind of close off with like our updated thoughts now, or do you guys want to carry on with any sort of deep dive stuff?
No, I think we should just wrap her.
Okay, sounds good. Bryce?
Yeah, I didn't have too many thoughts initially, and my updated thoughts, I guess the main thought I had beforehand is that it may or may not be long lasting, and my updated thought is that the evidence that I've seen all says that there's very little chance that it would last any less than 3 years, and a high likelihood it's going to be longer than 3 years. So that's kind of now my like threshold is like it should be at least 3 years unless something's just catastrophically wrong with the existing evidence, and it'll probably be longer. And that's really good, obviously.
Yeah, I would say I definitely came out of this research a lot more hopeful than I went into it. In some respects, watching the idiocy that has formed around this stuff made me a little bit more unhopeful. But I noticed that, like, it's quite amazing to watch what the companies have done. Like, just seeing how many companies are building a vaccine, how well they've done, how, like, they've, taken what is not used as a vaccine method at all and just rolled it out within, 9 months. It's crazy. Like, they started work on these. It's
old
wild.
White man, do it again.
You better not take it.
I'm sure there's some
Middle
I guess you can't call them minorities in the context of the global population.
Yeah, it's true.
Non-white and non-men involved.
Oh, actually, based on our sorry, I forgot the Asians.
Yeah,
true.
Pretty much the ones who are doing half of it.
Yeah. I have to cut that.
No, it stays in.
Post.
Fix it in post. Yeah. Pudluck's favorite term. Yeah, I came out thinking, like, I was thinking this would be a mess until 2022 at least. But I do think that there's a good chance that, yeah, like, we might be, like, pretty much moving back into normal by the next fall. But again, I think it's very contingent on the fact that there's a lot of different moving parts and something could change, and that could be another like a big mess for years to come. Like, you never know, right? But from what I've researched,
and
it's more optimistic.
The next president.
Yeah, I know. Here's hoping. Here's hoping. What are you talking about?
I don't know where I am on the chain of command or whatever. But if all Americans die, it has to go to some non-American, right? And then eventually,
one could say that if all Americans die, where does America truly exist if there's no heart in American to hold it?
Canada will claim America, right? And then technically most Canadians could die, and then technically I could be in line for it, right? Like, could happen.
You never know.
Are you gonna be the
better plan for the eventuality, though?
Yeah, this is definitely well worth your time.
Any other wrap-ups, thoughts?
I'm good. Price?
Yeah, I think that's all I've got.
The only thing I wanted to kind of mention broadly is, like, it seems like I didn't follow any of this literature obviously before this, but it seems like that vaccines and just medical research has advanced a lot because of all the funding and stuff. So it's like we might see a lot of cool, like, new medicine come out of the pandemic in general, especially vaccines.
With regards to that, I think the thing people aren't cluing in on that I've realized through researching this is, I don't know how true it is, but I would imagine that all the production of these RNA and DNA vaccines is developing new and more efficient techniques. And it's based on stuff that's currently being used in cutting edge cancer treatment. So being able to, like, use that cutting edge cancer treatment has now been improved and hopefully we'll be able to like feed back into the cancer treatment.
Well, and other vaccines too, right? Like,
yeah, 100% other vaccines.
Like, I just think you might see, like, this might be a couple of decades or a decade of what would have otherwise taken in terms of advancement and done in a year, right, or 8 months. So you might be basically a decade ahead of where we would have been in terms of vaccines.
It would be really interesting for things like the flu virus, because this is, as we've discussed, so much easier to iterate upon than a traditional vaccine.
Yeah, so there could actually be, again, some big benefits come out of this. Whether or not we will take advantage of the, like, you know, as much as the U.S. gets shit for their healthcare system, like, they spend a lot on healthcare. I actually don't think that you can really overspend on healthcare. I think they spend it on the wrong types of healthcare. Like, they waste money on insurance that is just, basically they spend money lining insurance companies' pockets for their healthcare and pharmaceutical companies' pockets.
Absolutely.
The notion of spending a large fraction of your GDP on healthcare, to me, is just like common sense. I think it's one of the things that, like, say, your average citizen underspends on is their health. And so maybe this, again, people seem to forget lessons really quickly, but maybe it'll shift the needle in the direction of people caring more about their health, and spending more time, energy, money, attention on their health, which I think would be just a great overall benefit to everyone in society to do that.
Yeah.
Rather than just fucking wasting money on Amazon. Like, go do stuff for your health, not your, don't buy
Why
trash.
not both? Buy the latest health fads on Amazon.
True.
Also, I think another co-benefit that I think will bear out is just greater acceptance of spending public money on healthcare, which, like, as you're saying, like, you can't really overspend on health. And I think that's just very fundamentally human. Like, we tend to put off things that don't have an immediate gain for us. And in an ideal world, the government takes some of our money in taxes and puts that towards things that are good for us in the long term, like healthcare. So we don't actually have to.
And just putting in little more economics on that, people also want to spend on visible things.
Mhm.
So people want to show off, basically, right?
Yeah.
And that's a zero-sum game. Healthcare is not, right? So people generally underspend on things like healthcare because they would rather spend, on a fancy car. And so the only way to stop that, because it's zero-sum, is to, like, force people to spend money on those non-fancy things. And you're actually just absolutely better off because the the pissing contest, so to speak, is zero-sum. You're better off spending on things that have an actual practical return because you're zero-sum for the other things. So it doesn't matter how much if you spend 1,000 on those things or 10,000, it's all the same to you, basically. Or society, I guess, society-wide, it's just a wash. But on things that actually have, like, meaningful impacts, like healthcare, it's not zero-sum. So you want to force people to spend more money on non-zero-sum things and less money on zero-sum things.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point that people would be wise to take in. It's not as fun, but in the long term, I think one of the things that kind of came out of this, and hopefully people take it to heart, I hope this kills the health at any size movement and just forces people to realize, like, hey, you do need to take care of yourself, even though it's not as glamorous as, buying that nice car or something. It's just, you're not going to die alone in a hospital bed because you got sick with COVID and, they couldn't let people into the room.
Are you trying to tell me it's not a good strategy to have 45% of your population predisposed to severe COVID outcomes?
Well, it depends on what you're looking to accomplish, I suppose, Price. You never know what I'm thinking.
Fatter you are, more likely you are to be hit by a bus and be included in the stats.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's it for me. Anything else?
Yeah, I think we should wrap it there.
Alrighty.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Peace.
Peace. Alrighty. That was 2 hours. Not bad.